as far as metaphysical things, right? We believe in God. We believe in angelic beings, which, I'll use that as an umbrella under which demons will fall. Okay, so like whether they're rebellious or just. And then we believe in human souls, right? When we talk about the metaphysical realm, that's it. And all of a sudden you have this explosion of New Age thought where there's like lots of different things, and those demons, right, are completely and totally committed to their cause. You'll talk to like some of these ex-witches and things like that, and they'll say like, well, I did follow this demon, but he actually converted or something like that, right? This is all like the total BS that the demon tries to wrap you up in.
This is your nautical lantern on the dangerous seas of darkness. Let's push off from the placid shore of the status quo and explore what's beyond the horizon. I am your host, BT, and this is Truth and Shadow, your podcast of the supernatural. Greetings, listeners, to another interview episode. Today we will be talking with Dave VanVickle of Every Knee Shall Bow, a podcast available on iTunes through Ascension Presents. Exorcism is a practice deeply embedded in our religious and spiritual traditions. It has often captivated our imagination. Popular culture typically sensationalizes exorcisms by portraying them as dramatic battles between good and evil. However, beyond the theatrics lies a profound theological reality that deserves careful examination. So today I invite you to explore the importance of understanding exorcism in its proper place as a sacramental within the context of the Church's tradition and her theology. And while exorcism finds its roots in ancient religious practices, not merely belonging to Judaism or Christianity, it transcends cultural and geographical boundaries. Throughout history, various cultures have believed in the existence of sinister entities and have developed rituals to expel them. In the Christian tradition, exorcism holds a unique place, reflecting her understanding of spiritual warfare and the power of Christ over evil. The gospel accounts of Jesus casting out demons and others, including Peter, serve as a foundation for the Church's practice of exorcism, emphasizing the authority of Christ and the victory of light over darkness. The theological significance of exorcism lies in its sacramental nature, and we'll talk about this more in the episode. We understand that sacraments are visible signs of invisible realities, conveying God's grace to the faithful, instituted by Christ. Exorcism, as a sacramental act, embodies the Church's belief in the spiritual dimension of human existence and the need for spiritual healing and liberation. And it's through the invocation of Christ's name and the power of prayer, sometimes and fasting, that exorcism reaffirms the Christian's identity as a member of the body of Christ. And we're called to participate in this ongoing battle against sin and evil. In addition to these theological dimensions, exorcism itself intersects with psychological and societal factors. The Church recognizes the reality of demonic possession, but it also acknowledges and affirms the complexity of human psychology and the possibility of psychological disorders masquerading as spiritual afflictions. The discernment of spirits. It's a crucial aspect of our approach to exorcism, and it requires careful evaluation of both the spiritual and psychological manifestations of behavior. And so, despite its theological significance, exorcism has been the subject of sensationalism and misunderstanding, particularly in popular culture. Movies, TV shows often depict this rite as intense, as a melodramatic confrontation between the priest and demonic entities that are powerful, sometimes more so than the priest. But it caters to a morbid fascination with the supernatural. And while such portrayals may entertain audiences, they distort the reality of exorcisms and detract from its sacredness. The true essence lies not in spectacle, but prayer, fasting, and the invocation of God's mercy. In conclusion, the importance of understanding exorcism in its proper place as a sacramental cannot be overstated. It is a practice rooted in ancient tradition, grounded in theological truth, and imbued with spiritual significance. As members of the Church, we are called to approach exorcism with reverence and discernment, recognizing its role in the ongoing struggle against evil and the promotion of spiritual warfare. May we deepen our understanding of the battlefield, not through sensationalism or speculation, but through prayer, study, and faithful adherence to the teachings of the Church. Today we are talking to one of the hosts of Every Knee Shall Bow. He is a graduate of Franciscan at Steubenville and a public speaker. He is the dedicated disciple, the energetic evangelist, the minister of mystagogia, Dave, the spiritual black belt VanVickle. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. I don't know about black belt, but I'll give my best today for sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
The biggest draw for me to reach out for you was specifically years ago. Well, it's been years now since you worked with Redeemed Online.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
The YouTube set of series there designed to teach the faithful important topics in their walk with Christ. And you did one, I think it was a 4 or 5 part series on spiritual warfare. And you have this long history of not merely giving talks on this topic, but you were offering assistance to priests in exorcism and other works of spiritual warfare. But before we dive into that, let's talk about you. What have you been up to these days?
Sure. Well, if you followed our story, you know my life's been kind of crazy the last few years. And so I have been mostly just taking care of my children. My wife passed away almost a year ago, and so been focusing on my children. But I do continue to follow cases and things like that, or respond to things that I don't know if I can uniquely respond to it, which is rare. But I'm just now kind of getting back into the speaking, which is how I support my family. So I have an event about this topic that I travel all over with called The Catholic Truth, about angels, demons, ghosts, exorcisms. And it was kind of like how to describe it? It was basically like I did not willingly give that talk the first time. I kind of always kept this part of my life a secret, but I started to hear just so much bad information out there and saw the power of this topic in the culture and thought, when I leave an exorcism, the things I think about are not the power of the devil. I think about the fantastic power of the priesthood, the power of Our Lady, the love of God, how that wins everything, right? How that trumps all. And it's like, man, people need to see that side of it, because most of it is just like a kind of a fantastical exposition of what people have seen the devil do. And I didn't want that to be. So that's how I support my family with that event particularly.
What was it that actually brought you in to give that conversation? Who found out?
Yeah. So a priest who was running a seminary said, this is interesting that our seminarians go to school for this long and they have absolutely no, other than maybe like an elective angelology class, really no teaching on this. So they asked if I would give a talk. And I really begrudgingly gave, I thought, no one wants to hear this. I really don't want to be pigeonholed as like a weirdo, but I gave it and I gave it the same talk 2 nights in a row. The first night, only 4 people showed up. It was optional. And I said to him, could we just cancel tomorrow night? Like I can get home to my family, And he was like, no, I know there's some people coming tomorrow night. And when I showed up the next night, I mean, the auditorium we were in was just like packed, completely packed, standing room only. Because people had just like talked about this. And I realized at that time, like, it wasn't because of like eloquence or anything. It was because no one was talking about this in like an authentically Catholic way. And if they were, it was often, and I have great respect for these people, it was often exorcists writing about their ministry, and then you were kind of left to apply that to your own life. And as you know, most of us don't need an exorcism, right? We just need the exorcism, which is the cross, right? And so it was like, man, I need to do this. I need to speak on this and offer a different perspective.
There was a massive call for really bringing back the exorcist and the rite of exorcism.
Yeah. Okay, so I would say no. The when this started changing. So when I started, I was 16 years old. There were about 7 stable exorcists in the whole country, and I would say 2 of them were really active, like so active that they couldn't keep up with their cases. The rest of them were like very quiet. They were secret. No one knew who they were, but they were there and they did their cases and everything. And that's kind of when I got started. And then all of a sudden, I think it was 1998, Pope John Paul issued a motu proprio saying like, look, you have to, like, this is part of your duty as a bishop to appoint an exorcist. And the reasoning is that people were going to Rome to get exorcisms. And he was saying like, look, our guys can't handle the whole world's energument, which is like, technical term for a demoniac. Right. So he did that. And I think to date, I just got back from one of the big American exorcism conferences. And I think they mentioned, the number they threw out was 142 are appointed now. And so we're moving in a great direction.
Because we're in America and we've got about, 8,000 priests or something like that?
Right. And yeah, and I think appointing exorcists is just the very first job. Like, as far as I'm concerned, like, I see a trajectory of like 2 trains headed for the same track. And there will be a time when I think bishops will probably have to say, hey, we need to respond. All priests need to respond to this battle. Because there's just some things like kind of bubbling in the culture that you can see are like perfect for Satan to use. And the exorcist won't be able to handle it. So what I mean is, like, every diocese is going to have to appoint someone. Those exorcists are going to have to be teaching their brother priests. Those priests are going to have to be responding to their parishes. It's going to get to that point.
Exorcism is a beautiful gift. It's a sacramental, really. And I've done a cursory reading of stuff put out by Father Ripperger, And what I find really interesting, and I think not a lot of people really get this, is the fact that they're dealing with things that are really intelligent. And I think that cannot be stressed.
Okay, so what we're dealing with is non-corporal beings. So if you can like kind of put on your philosopher's cap here, right? Anything that your body limits you on, they're not limited by. Okay, so they don't experience time and space the way we do. They experience it in some metaphysical way, but not like us, right? Like the only thing that's infinite is God, but they definitely don't experience time in like a linear fashion. So they have like these natural perfections that put them at a higher level of perfection than us. But then also, like, their intellect is created at a fantastically higher level of perfection than ours. So they don't have to learn things. They understand them just instinctually completely. They were given that knowledge. It is infused. And so, and let's say, like, when we say learn, right, that's a very specific term we're using. They do get better at tricking us. Okay. And so, I mean, that's like something that no one really understands. A lot of people do not think about this in the exorcism. Like it with the fascination of it is, people will say to me all the time, like, I'd really like to see an exorcism. And I think in their mind, they're thinking, well, I'm doing okay, right? Like, I have a daily prayer life. Like, I'm not in mortal sin. I'm not. But these guys, like demons, will just totally screw with you, right? Like, I mean, they'll really turn the screws on you and figure out what your weakness is, and they'll go to town on you intellectually because they can, right? They're so intelligent. And so it's really important, right, that you don't try to match it, which you see, sometimes when an exorcist kind of goes south, you'll see if you dig down into it, there could be a few reasons. And a lot of times one of the reasons is like, they kind of get believing their own legend a little bit, and they try to match the intelligence of the demons, which they can't do, right? So so it's dangerous. They will mess with you for sure.
Yeah, there's no way we can match that level of intelligence in our one simple lifetime. They've been doing it for millennia.
Right.
The thing that really had me curious, well, I'm curious in the unseen realm specifically because, I kind of grew up reading about aliens and UFOs, but I think that was popular in the 80s and 90s, right? You had Whitley Strieber and a bunch of other people really big at the time. But then, as I got older, I was drawn into Wicca, and then I was drawn into full-on ceremonial magic, and then into some basically deep witchcraft.
Okay.
And I found that was a real scary part. When I look back at it, it was a real scary, and I think living through it was a real scary moment in my life. But I realized that there was dark, sinister forces in that time. And since then, it's been kind of this drive of mine to talk about it, to at least interact with people who know about it, and just learn, before I got to a point where I could just, have my own show and podcast, just interview people and get this knowledge out there.
Sure.
What is some of the most, like if you were to give some wisdom to somebody about this specific topic, we warn people, they're not supposed to just be curious about it. I'm not telling people to be curious about the supernatural.
Right.
But let's say we've got somebody who is really battling the fact that the demonic is real. What do we tell them? What do we talk to them about?
Sure. Yeah. I think when we talk about the devil, and this is something like I coach a lot of clerics in it, is we want to say a few things. First of all, that he's real, that he's defeated, that he's super intelligent, and that he has a plan to draw you away from God, right? Like that those are kind of the things that are really important to remember. And I also think, like, in this day and age, what's really important is to say, like, as far as metaphysical things, right? We believe in God. We believe in angelic beings, which, I'll use that as an umbrella under which demons will fall. Okay. So like whether they're rebellious or just, I'd call them angels if they're just, demons if they're rebellious. Okay. And then we believe in human souls, right? And St. Thomas gets into like, animal souls and stuff like that. But like when we talk about the metaphysical realm, that's it, right? And all of a sudden you have this explosion of New Age thought where there's like lots of different things, and those demons, right, are completely and totally committed to their cause because they don't experience time in a linear fashion, right? They are against God. So there's not going to be any redemption. Okay. So, you'll talk to like some of these ex-witches and things like that, and they'll say like, well, I did follow this demon, but he actually converted or something like that, right? This is all like the total BS, right? That the demon tries to wrap you up in. And so I would say, yeah, like, first of all, it's real, right? This is happening. And you can understand this throughout the entire man's history, right? The Council Fathers at Vatican II said I'm going to misquote this, but it's about right. That the whole of man's history is the story of dour combat between the forces of darkness and the forces of light. And we believe that as Catholics, right, that what that means is like the story of like an angelic battle that happened like cosmically. Okay. And that cosmic battle spills into time, and that we are the spoils of that. And so I think, like, keeping that battle in the background is so important. And then finally, I think with the explosion of interest in this topic, we have to start reminding people that the battle is primarily moral, right? That obedience is how you win. because you'll see, and not to pick on my cases, but a constant thing that I combat against, right, is they'll say this is happening because this witch did this to me, or this person did this to me, or this, and they always want to blame the other person. And I keep saying to them, okay, where's the vulnerability in your life? And finally I'll have to have that conversation where I say, yeah, it's possible that this happened to you because of someone else. But if it leaves, it's going to be because you have grown in holiness, right? I mean, that's the way it works. Like, exorcism isn't magic.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's because our culture is bathed basically in Hollywood's versions of the stories. And,
right.
You know, the Exorcist of something like Emily Rose, or even The Exorcist, to be honest, you know, painted a picture that quite honestly is artistic license.
Sure.
Most people don't understand that a good majority of the spiritual combat happens more along the lines of what's shown in the movie Nefarious than what happens on the bed in The Exorcist. And I think people need to hear that.
Right. So in the movie, let's use The Exorcist for an example, because The Exorcism of Emily Rose is a substantially more complicated topic. But let's use the movie The Exorcist, right? What you're seeing is an aping or a mockery of the sacrament of baptism, right? So like when we're baptized, right, the Holy Spirit comes into us and we believe that we are ontologically changed, right? We have a new character. And so what happens is the devil's like, ooh, I like this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make my own thing where I put someone in that body and I start messing with their head, right? I find some way to get rights over that body. I start messing with their mind. I find a way to get in. And then I make them believe that I animate their body. So it's a very common thing for our cases to say, well, he says if he leaves, then I die. Am I going to die if he leaves? You know, because he's my soul now, right? Well, this is a lie, right? Obviously, everything he says is a lie. So it's an aping of God, and it's the most extreme form of an aping of God. But at its, like, let's say, molecular level, like obviously not molecular, metaphysical level, at the very base level, what it is just a series of choices away from God. And a person eventually gets to a point where they compromise themselves so much that a demon is able to have rights over their body. Okay. And when it comes down to it, like if we're ever wondering, like, what is the start of this? Well, the start of this is sin. You know, the start of this is rebellion.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's right on point, because I've said that to other people, that this is a legal battle happening in a courtroom kind of thing.
Right.
Well, I mean, just break that down. Break down rights. I mean, what?
Sure.
What do you mean?
When it comes to the activity of demons, we have ordinary and extraordinary activity. Ordinary activity would be temptation, right? And so while not every temptation is from a demon, you can rest assured that every day we're tempted by demons, right? That they have a plan to slowly draw you away from the Lord. The other activity would be called extraordinary activity. And extraordinary activity, for ordinary activities, they have their right? Adam gave them the right to tempt us, period. So that's just part of the world, the flesh, and the devil, right? We're battling against that. With extraordinary activity, they need some right to be able to attack us in these extraordinary ways. And the extraordinary activity we would describe as a far more intense, right? It would be like exponentially, almost to the point that you couldn't even compare the two, okay? But what we see is that it usually comes through either implicit or explicit permission, okay, to a demon. So in the case of The Exorcist, the real story of The Exorcist, Robbie, the implicit permission is that I believe it was his aunt. His aunt gave him a Ouija board, okay? And his acceptance of that Ouija board, even though there might have not been moral culpability at that time, for him, for her there was, that acceptance of that Ouija board would be implicit permission, okay? And so, and you'll see this even in almost even more mundane ways. Like, for instance, somebody buys an antique at an antique store, right? And things start happening in their house, okay? And they're like, well, I didn't do anything wrong. It's like, yeah, I know. We're not talking about explicit permission here. We're talking about implicit permission. Then finally, you have explicit permission, which is what you were talking about in your past life, right? You when you get to these more serious religious forms of Satanism and Wiccanism, like then you start to go through rites and mock sacraments where you actually seek out the relationship, and that's when it gets really bad. Once a demon has rights to do this, the job of the exorcist is to remove those rights. So for instance, if the rite is pornography, let's say it's pornography, what we would do is we would say, look, what you have to do is renounce that sin of pornography. Say you don't want that relationship anymore. And then the exorcist casts the demon out. Okay. And because as long as that rite exists, it's going to be very difficult to cast out. And confession will play a big role in that as well. But yeah, so that's how implicit, explicit rites work. And turns out demons are very legalistic, right? They can hold on to things. And so, like, for instance, in a house case, you know, you could have a house case that just keeps flaring up over and over and over again. And it's like, what is going on here? Something is happening. You can't figure it out. And finally, one day, right, you realize like, oh, there's a cursed object that was hidden in your attic or something like that, right? That's a perfect example of what happened. I had a case here where I felt so bad because somebody came up to me at one of my talks and said they bought an old colonial house that was, you know, built in the 1800s, and the whole neighborhood said it was haunted. And I said, don't worry, because every time someone buys an old colonial house, the whole neighborhood says it's haunted. Right. You know, like just don't worry about it. That's just the way it works here. And about 2 years later, I got a call of just this woman in terror, you know, and come to find out that they had opened up the floor with to trying to put in air conditioning or something like that, and found out that it was the home at the time, like in 1904 or something like that, was the home of a serial killer that no one had ever caught, right? And he was hiding these things. And when I said, could you take a picture of the things that were in the floor? And she took a picture. I could see they were laid out in occult fashion, right? They were these little bundles. It was exactly like what you see like a witch do. And so obviously there was more than just the murder, right? That's bad enough, but there was more than just that. It was also just this worship of probably Satan. I don't know.
I've talked to some people about sociopath and psychopathic behavior, and the fact that sometimes that's not all just human intellect and will. Right. And then with a serial killer doing a behavior like that, and the idea that you can turn a place into a locus, it's that's basically what they call it. It's a locus of power, specifically always dark power. It's never good. There's no point, because like I said, angels don't do stuff like this.
Yeah, sure.
It's always the demonic forces, the sinister forces, as I call them. Right. And that's spooky. That's spooky.
Right. Yeah. And you go to these places where, there's a case of infestation here in Pittsburgh where they found out the guy was doing abortions in his house before abortion was legal and burying the children in the backyard. Well, as far as rights go, I mean, what are you going to do? Excavate all the backyard? You know what I mean? Like, it's probably going to be a problem for a long, long time, so. Yeah, blood is a big currency for demons, right? Blood is a big deal.
Yeah, that's a good point. But the thing is, it's not always just about demons. We also have angels that are on our side.
Right.
Let's just talk about the forces of good.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, like one of the things that we've noticed is that when an exorcism ends, right, it usually ends in one of three ways. Could be just the power of the priesthood, right? The Catholic priesthood. You see this constantly where they're just sick of fighting against this curmudgeonly, holy old priest, right? They don't want to do it anymore. Number two would be an angel or a saint is sent to intervene, right? And we see this all the time. I tell a story often about Saint Gemma coming into my life. Saint Gemma Galgani is my very favorite saint, and I didn't even know who she was. One day I was doing an intake for a diocese, and 18-year-old kid was, between his two uncles who were firefighters. They were these huge guys, and he was just foaming at the mouth and screaming obscenities when they brought him into my office. And they sat him down on a couch. It was probably I had a big office. It was 20 feet away from me, and I was sitting behind my desk, and he calmed down a little bit, and I started asking him questions, just normal questions like, well, how do you do in school? Do you play any sports? Things like that. At one point I said, I'll just say Joshua. That wasn't his name, but I said, Joshua, do you know how much God loves you? And he said, and all of a sudden, his eyes rolled back in his head. And before I could even blink, he had broken this vase and had come and had it up against my throat. I mean, it had to be less than a second that he had this vase up against my throat. And I thought, oh my gosh, he's going to kill me. And he looked above me and he kind of stopped and he looked at me and he said, if that little Dago from Luca weren't behind you, I'd have killed you 3 seconds ago. And I had no idea who this was, right? I like, what is he talking about? And he just sat down real gently. He kept looking up kind of behind me, like, like to see like, what was going on. And this kid was eventually admitted for exorcism. And this, every time I'd walk in, the demon would start talking about this little girl from Luca. Finally, the exorcist demanded to know who it was. And it was St. Gemma Colgani. And St. Gemma is known for intervening in exorcism. So this is one of the reasons that the exorcism ritual starts with the litany of saints. It's not just to ask for prayer, right? It's not just for that. It's to say, like, look, this is the church we represent. This person beat you, and this person beat you, and this person beat you, and you have no hope of any possible victory today because this is who you're up against. It's not just the faith of the priest. It's not just the faith of people praying. It's not just the strength of the demon. It is, you are against the eternal, infinite power of God played out in the history of the church. And we remind him, like, look, this is you're beaten already. And all these guys are a reminder of how you've been beaten. So we see that. And then finally, the third way that we see exorcisms end, and most incredible, is Our Lady, right? Our Lady was given power over the evil one. Okay. And so in every spiritual battle, she has a place in that, right? She's going to take a place in that. And so Our Lady often is the one who comes and intervenes at the end to finally save her child. And Our Lady is not gentle about that. Right. She's like a mama bear, right? She does not like it when Satan, who is her adversary, right? Like, people love to put kind of on the scale Satan and Jesus. We can't do that, right? There's no scale that measures infinity with his creation. Okay. But Mary and Satan, right, they play out very much as like, the opposites. Okay. And so when Mary comes, I mean, it is fantastic to watch. It's very incredible. And oftentimes it is played out in ways that I would never guess. Like, remember one time the exorcist asking the victim, can you see what's going on? And the victim said, yes, I can see. There's a lady in white who's here and the demons are screaming. And the exorcist said, why aren't they leaving? And she said, they want to leave, but she's making them kneel down and say a glory be before they leave. Like, she was torturing them, punishing them, right? Spanking them basically before they left. And Our Lady intervenes all the time like this. The angels as well. Like, we'll see, oftentimes the angels will come and they have their own rites of exorcism, right? They have their own angelic rites of exorcism. You see this like kind of in the book of Tobit, right? This very strange story of him, pulling the guts of the fish out and burning it as incense and things like that. Angels will do very interesting things. Sometimes they describe it. The victims will describe what's going on, and we don't really know what's happening. But what we see is that they're intervening in these cases. I've seen it hundreds of times.
That's the most amazing thing, is the fact that we're not alone in the battle at all. It's not just us. We have champions. And I think more people need to be aware that we have people we can call on. We have, not just simply Joe Christian down the street. We can say, hey, I'm having a problem, pray for me. We have a host in heaven that we can call on for help. And I think that's valuable.
Absolutely. And yeah, and I think to remember that it's not just like it's not just like your big brother. It's not just like your buddy. You said a host, right? That's an army. An army of angels is around us, right? And they're just waiting. I mean, Our Lady, the saints, and the angels are waiting to intervene in our life. And the way why they wait is because we haven't engaged them.
Yeah, because I tell people, I was like, look, you can let Joe Demon into your life. You can just say, hey, I've got this pendulum, or I've got this thing and I like it and I know what it is, or I've got this book on sorcery. So, little things, like you said, the small steps of invitation that we give to the demonic forces. But the truth is we can have its counter. We can have a rosary that we might not pray
Absolutely.
the rosary on, but we might pray the Divine Mercy Chaplet on it. But the thing is we've got a weapon that we can use.
Absolutely. And puts them to shame, really. I mean, the rosary, like, they don't have a counter for it, right? I mean, like, they can do everything they want, but like the rosary is like unbelievably powerful because of its incarnational aspect, right? Like, demons despise outward signs of grace. They hate it. Same with Marian consecration. Same with the consecrations to the angels, right? We use this stuff all the time. And the nice thing is, in the exorcism ministry, not that you can quantify grace or even grab onto it, right, or measure it, but you see the effects so vividly and so physically in a certain sense. And so it's like, man, those effects are present in all our lives. It's just we don't see it in that like non-ethereal way, you know.
Ultimately, we know that we have free will as humans. And the demons, the angels, they have free will as well. I think the demons have less free will because it seems like you can talk to some exorcist and it's like, well, the demon can be sent to you by God to do something to get you towards grace.
Oh, right, like Padre Pio or something, or St. Paul. Is that what you're talking about? Like a victim soul? Yeah.
I'm reading about Saint. It's not Anthony. It's Antony.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
Desert Father, and he talks about being bombarded frequently by the devil,
Right.
and I mean this is third century. I mean it's right off the
Yeah. So in these strange cases, and this is hard when you're working in the exorcism ministry because we tell the cases like, look, what you need to do is just focus on your relationship with Jesus, and everything's going to be okay. And that's 100% true. But oftentimes they stumble onto the story of St. Anthony of the Desert, St. Padre Pio, St. Maria of Jesus Crucified, these stories. And even like, well, the Exorcism of Emily Rose is based on a true story of someone I believe to be a victim soul. And like, that's a troubling thing for them because these are very holy people, right? Okay. Now, if you understand, if we again use the framing of the battle for the history of the world, right, that's what's happening and that we're the spoils, it's easier to understand, right, that because God will use suffering, he will use penance in order to save souls. And so like with Padre Pio, oftentimes when he was beaten by the devil, he knew that the next day a particularly wayward sinner was coming for confession, right, that he was suffering for that case. It's not just that, though. If you think about it this way, I had a friend who was like a big time rugby stud in college. And I remember one time talking to him and he said, this other team had a guy who was like 500 pounds on the team, right? He was a huge dude, right? And I remember him saying, I wish we had someone like that. And I said, man, it seems like he could hardly move. And he said, yeah, but you'd get so tired trying to stop him. Like, how would you ever play 90 minutes of rugby or however long? I can't remember how long it is, but and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, that is the story of Padre Pio and St. John Vianney and these saints, where it's like their hell is throwing everything they can at them and exhausting resources on these super holy people, and it is taking some of it away from us, right? Now there's so many demons and so much power, right? Maybe not necessarily like you can't quantify it, but certainly that's what's happening, right? That they're taking a lot of the brunt of this battle off of our shoulders, and thank God they are. There's that vignette from the life of Saint John Vianney where a demoniac comes into his church, is rolling around. The curé, who's like 4 feet tall, comes out of his confessional, barely pays any attention to him, gives him a blessing. The demon calms down, and the demon says, if there were 3 of him in the world, my entire kingdom would be destroyed. Okay. This is like a perfect example of what we're talking about, like that demons are just desperately trying to do this. Now, in the life of Saint Gemma, in the life of like Blessed Maria of Jesus, or Saint Maria of Jesus Crucified, I can't remember if she's been declared a saint yet or not. It'll be soon. they were actually, we would call them possessed. We would call them holy demoniacs, right? That God allowed that to even happen to that point. Why? Because to cast that, for a person to cooperate with the priest, to cooperate with the grace of the church, and to have that demon cast out, right? And to triumph even in that state of subjection to a demon is so damning and damaging to the world of darkness, to the kingdom of hell, that it's a source of grace. And so God allowed that to happen. With regards to St. Paul, right? Remember, he says the thorn in his flesh, messenger of Satan to pester me. We don't know the extent of what that was. We really don't know exactly what it was, but probably it was like a Padre Pio situation, right? Where he's,
or at least a nephew,
right? Yeah. Right.
You mentioned victim soul, and this one needs to be defined.
Sure. Yeah, it's really hard to understand. As Christians, like, right, the famous verse, right, is take up your cross daily and follow the Lord. And that plays a role personally, spiritually, but it also plays a role cosmically, okay? That in a certain sense, we join in the one sacrifice of Christ, right? And for the forgiveness of the world, for the repentance of the world, that we can offer our sacrifices to the sacrifice on the cross. Any suffering that we have, we can offer to that and take part in the atonement, right? What Christ has done. And in a certain sense, even kind of play the role of Abraham, where he's bargaining with God, saying like, Lord, for these sacrifices, please, stay your wrath from the world. Like, send mercy, send more mercy, send more mercy. We believe that as Catholics, okay? And these victim souls have a special vocation to that, right? That they play a very special role in offering up their sufferings. By the way, the gravity doesn't matter, okay? Because there's some people who put Saint Therese in the victim soul category, okay? And Therese wasn't necessarily beaten by demons or anything like that, but she was greatly troubled, and she would offer the tiniest little sacrifice, right? The tiniest little sacrifice up to the Lord, and it was, like, incredibly fruitful. So these victim souls, the most famous would be like Padre Pio, probably, like, as far as, because he's a modern saint. We watched it well, I didn't watch it happen, but people watched it happen, right? It was very public. People were visiting him, and suffered so greatly. But in a certain sense, all of us, the victim souls, are here to teach all of us about our role in suffering for souls.
Yeah, I fill up in my body what is lacking in the sufferings of Christ,
right.
For,
Exactly.
for him and his church, as it says.
Which is, by the way, super troubling outside of this theology, right? Like, what is lacking, and what could be possibly lacking, right?
Yep.
But when you realize, like, oh no, what's lacking is us. He wants us to be a part of
Our
this.
participation, yeah. A couple of things that the church has given us in our fight in spiritual warfare are sacramentals. Not just the sacraments, but the sacraments are commonly talked about, but it's the sacramentals that I think not very many people know about.
Sure.
So first, what is a sacramental? And let's talk about a couple of your favorites.
So a sacramental is an outward sign that signifies some sort of inward grace. Now that's technically the definition of a sacrament, right? But the way a sacramental works is it's based on the faith of a person. So a sacrament affects what it means to, no matter the faith of the person, okay? Like the seven sacraments. But a sacramental is based on our faith. So, for instance, when we gaze upon a crucifix, right, that's been blessed, that's a sacramental. Our faith in that crucifix is what kind of engages the blessing of the church upon it, okay? Sacramentals come in all different kind of forms, shapes, and sizes. For instance, you mentioned at the beginning, the exorcism ritual, the solemn exorcism ritual, is a sacramental. It's a blessing, and that would qualify as a sacramental. Now, we use them constantly. We use sacramentals all the time, specifically because the devil, you see this, like, there's a character of the devil that just despises the flesh of Jesus Christ, right? And so this is why Catholicism is kind of like the perfect place to fight the devil, right? Because we believe in these physical manifestations, right? These physical representations of grace. People used to say the smells and bells, right? Like the incense and the bells and things like that. Satan despises that kind of thing. And so we use them all the time. So we use relics often. That's a very common thing. I had my camera on before. You can see all the relics behind me. That those are all for that ministry. We use the rosary. It's like one of the first things we'll teach someone is to pray the rosary. In these cases, we use the St. Benedict medal. I know I don't use it very often, but I know a lot of priests who do use the St. Benedict medal. Another very common one with exorcists is the Epiphany blessing, like the chalk blessing above your door. That is a very, very common thing that exorcists use, and we find it to be a very powerful exorcism for a home or for a place like that. A holy water is the kind of sacramental par excellence for spiritual warfare. Okay. Holy water is a big deal. It's referenced constantly in the lives of the saints as far as like putting demons to flight. But holy water, again, what is it reminding us of? It's reminding us of baptism, which is the sacrament par excellence of liberation from evil. And so when we use it, it's a reminder of the constant liberation that God gave his people through water, whether crossing the Jordan or the Red Sea or something like that. Right.
Through the ark, right? Noah's Ark.
Right.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, the thing is they're all weapons given to the war, for our warfare. I mean, constantly, Paul tells us about the armor that we have, but we also have weapons. We're not just here to be clothed in protective gear, so to speak, but to be able to fight back. And the way we fight back is through prayer, fasting, reading scripture, and sacramentals, and the sacraments, of course.
Yeah. I think your point is maybe the most important point that we're missing today. Like when my kids like ask, like, are we safe from the devil? It's like, if the devil's not in our house, it's because we have him on the run, right? That I want them to understand that we are on the offensive. Like that's like, we have this weird idea that when we leave church, we're like in his territory, but ideally what we should be thinking is like, no, we're coming after him. We're tired of any compromise and we want to come after him. And that's the way to understand this kind of stuff.
Yeah. As we start to wrap up, let's talk about some of the conferences or anything that you have coming up. Let's just talk about
sure.
like kind of basically, thesis, what's the main point of the conference? What's some of the main takeaways that we can carry from the things that you would talk about?
One of the things that happened that was like actually a blessing through COVID was I started doing webinars. What happens at my event, The Catholic Truth About Angels, Demons, Ghosts, Exorcisms, and Hauntings, is I do a Q&A session at the end. And I basically take about 20 questions that I can spend maybe 1 to 2 minutes answering. Most of these questions are questions I could take a week to answer, right? And so it's hard. So when COVID happened, I had to cancel 54 events. I was like, you know what? I'm going to start taking the common questions and just do long form answers of those. And so I do them almost weekly. I have a few coming up soon. I'm going to be talking about Christian meditation, the prayer that makes saints. And this is for patrons only, but it's very inexpensive to become a patron. And what I think we're missing sometimes in the spiritual life, like, there's kind of like a lack of spiritual directors today. And so people aren't like getting the spiritual knowledge they have, but there are no saints that didn't get that way without Christian meditation, right? Meditating on the Gospels is the way to do it. And people will say things like, well, I go to adoration every day. And I say, that's fantastic and it's wonderful, but it's not the same. It isn't the same. And what you see in Christian meditation is like, it is the primary way God makes saints, right? Like it's the way he starts to draw us into contemplative prayer. And that's why we really need to learn it. And so I'll be doing an introduction to that. In March, I'm doing an webinar called Charismatic Spirituality and Spiritual Warfare. I'm basically going to talk about the charismatic gifts and how I've seen them play out in spiritual warfare. And March 21st, I'm really excited about this webinar because no matter how many times you try to teach people what the teaching of the church is, stories go so much farther, right? And so I'm going to be talking about psychics, mediums, and ruined lives. And I'm just going to tell some stories about people who have had their lives completely ruined by visiting psychics and mediums, and talk about like how dangerous it is, both mentally, spiritually, but also just like in your like practical everyday. Like people get messed up from this stuff. Yeah, and so I'll be doing that. If you're local to Pittsburgh, I have tons of stuff. You can just look at my website, thecatholictruthAboutAngelsAndDemons.com. Yeah, I have a lot of stuff coming up, so I'm happy to be part of this. I'm working on a few books right now too, so I'm hoping to introduce those soon.
Wow. Now I'm going to have to ask a question about personal story.
Yeah, sure.
Give me one of those stories about just somebody who went and saw a medium.
Sure. I have a friend who his wife began to see. This would be she called herself a medium. She was really a psychic, really. I mean, not that there's usually not a difference, right? Usually they do both, right? But she started to go see this medium when her mom died, and then she started going to her for psychic readings. And she would say to this woman, you know, like, I just know there's something wrong. I know there's something wrong. I know there's something wrong. This psychic decided that her husband was having an affair. So told this woman her husband's having an affair, and over and over and over again. And I knew this man. I knew him to be a very good man. Like, this is not true. Yeah. He's a holy, holy man. I mean, the pull that this psychic had on this woman's mind was greater than just something like a cult leader. Okay. I mean, there was something spiritual here going on, that this woman, like, you know, the husband would say, like, when am I going to have an affair? I'm with you all the time. How is that possible? And she'd say, I don't know, but she told me, so it must be true. Well, that marriage ended because of it. I mean, it literally ended. And I mean, I know them still. Please say a prayer for them. But it ruined a marriage, right? And so this is a classic ploy of the devil. He didn't even have to possess this person, right? He was able to do it so much more simply than that, to accomplish his will so much more simply than that.
Yeah. Yeah, I did a episode specifically on spiritual warfare dealing with sacramentals and sacraments, and the one that I really needed to beat home was marriage, because the number one thing it seems that the enemy likes to go after is marriage.
Yeah, I've been doing talks all over Pittsburgh on marriage and spiritual warfare because of exactly what you said. And this is, you know, at the beginning I was kind of alluding that there's things bubbling in our culture that are like two trains headed. I mean, marriage and family is in his sights. He is going after your marriages. He's going after your kids, and he is going to do whatever he can to destroy it. And like, when you see Satan go after something, one of the things you have to do is be like, okay, obviously he always tries to turn on its side what God does, right? He's always trying to flip what God does. And so if we look at that and we say, well, that must mean that God wants us to conquer through these things, right? And that's absolutely the case, that Satan sees marriage as the quickest, easiest way to destroy his kingdom, right? That he despises beautiful, fruitful, happy marriages. And people who have children, either physically or spiritually, right, are fruitful, right, that they make new disciples. And that, I mean, he sees his end in that. There's no question.
I mean, there's no reason why the family that prays together stays together is not, you know, I mean, that's a simple statement, but it's profound.
It's profound. It's profound. Absolutely.
Where can people listen to Dave VanVickle more?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. If you Google my name, yeah.
I'll make sure it ends up in the show notes, of course.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I appreciate
Anything else that should be in the show? You said you're working on some books. Just tell me what you're working on, not, you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. I have a book that I'm working on that I should sign, you know, the final contract soon. Basically what it is exorcism at the heart of the Christian mystery. So I'm going to go through the entirety of the church and show about the apotropaic presence of God throughout the church. The apotropaic presence of Jesus is like his warrior presence, his liberating presence. And while most of us do not need an exorcism, right, all of us need that liberating presence. We all need the liberation that Christ offers. And so I'm going to go through things like the saints, the Eucharist, all the sacraments, all of these things, and show how exorcism, even though we don't need a solemn one, right? Not all of us, okay? Not many of us even. We all need the power of that exorcism in our life. And so, yeah, that's what I'm working on right now. So. And then I am working on a book for teens called the Catholic Truth About Angels, Demons, Ghosts, Exorcisms, and Hauntings, which is a Q&A book. Yeah, I'm hoping to have that announced soon as well.
And you've written a children's story, haven't you?
Well, okay, I have a lot of things written that probably will never see the light of day because I hate them so much. But I have slowly been working on a novel about this topic that is, I'm an avid reader and I would read all day if I could. And this book is not great. So I doubt it'll ever see the light of day, but we'll see.
That's how we know, Dave, that you're an artist at heart, because you hate your own creative.
Right.
It's real easy to sit in the logical reasoning situation and just import teaching, but you're creating something.
Yeah. But yeah, if you check the Catholic Truth About Angels and Demons.com, I can't remember what the last count was, but there's almost 100 webinars up on my Patreon account, and they all center pretty much around this topic. So you can almost get a master's degree in demonology on there. And yeah, if you're interested in this stuff, and I would say that I offer a very different perspective as far as how to learn about this. I like the heart of the church, right? I want the church fathers, I want the saints, I want those kinds of things, and so that's where I offer most of what I teach on.
That's brilliant. That's a good way of instructing people. It's important to pull back the veil of history and show. I mean, it wasn't just Saint Benedict and the raven and the chalice. I mean, there's just so much more things that are important in our lives.
Absolutely.
Do you have any concluding thoughts?
No, please pray for me. Keep my apostolate in your prayers, and pray for all of you.
Thank you for being on the show, Dave. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. This is a free podcast based upon the value for value model. If you find value in this, or any episode, you can return that value by liking the show, subscribing to this channel, leaving a review, or sharing with a friend on your social media accounts. You can also donate on my website. Thank you again. This is BT for Truth and Shadow Podcast. You are the light in the darkness.